Recording. Hi everyone, and welcome to AMCHP in the time of COVID and our presentation, which is Culturally Specific Service Organizations and Title V Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs, or CYSHCN, Building Connections to Improve Equity for Oregon CYSHCN. My name is Allison Martin, and I'm the Assessment and Evaluation Manager for the Oregon Center for Children and Youth with Special Health Needs, or OCHN. We're the state's public health agency for children and youth with special health care needs. And I'm joined by three colleagues today. Dr. Claudia Biso-Fetzer is a professor at Central Oregon Community College, and she is representing the Latino Community Association, Ms. Cheryl Ghilardi-Kim is a research associate with the OCHN in the Assessment and Evaluation Unit. And Mr. Charles Smith, also known as Chuck, is the principal for Charles Smith Consulting and is representing the Sickle Cell Anemia Foundation of Oregon. So the purpose for our presentation today is to describe the partnership between culturally specific service organizations and the state Title V CYSHCN agency in implementing participatory needs assessment, and also to share findings with you. So Cheryl and I are going to start by talking about our organizational recruitment and our partnership agreements. And then Chuck is going to talk about SCAFO's data collection methods, the recruitment methods, and some challenges associated with that, and share findings. Then Claudia will do the same for the Latino Community Association. And then we'll close with Chuck, Claudia, and Cheryl sharing some collaboration lessons learned. So to begin, we wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page with what we mean by participatory needs assessment. And so that is a needs assessment that is conducted using a participatory research approach. And so we're sharing this continuum, and we're not going to go through all of the details of it, but we just want to point out how our project differs from traditional research. So although OCHN came up with the specific questions that guided our project, we conducted the project with the community, so with the community-based organizations. They participated in the development of the data collection methods, including the IRB protocols you'll hear about. They collected and co-own the data that they will share findings about with. They participated in the analysis and are participating in the dissemination of our results. And so most, if not all of us, are familiar with the National Survey of Children's Health, and that is a wealth of information. However, results that generalize to state populations of CYSHCN can be inadequate, and that's particularly true for children and youth with special health care needs who are members of communities of color. For example, at a most basic level in the state of Oregon, we don't have an estimate of the percentage of CYSHCN who are Black. During our 2015 needs assessment, we received a tremendous response to our family and youth surveys. However, the data collected did not well represent communities of color. And so for this, our 2020 5-year needs assessment, we sought to pilot some projects that collaborate with organizations who work in non-dominant ethnic communities to better understand the needs of CYSHCN and their families who are members of communities of color. We wanted to work directly with organizations as opposed to contracting this work out with an external research firm. And we did that for two reasons. Excuse me. First, that allowed our center to develop relationships within the respective communities and to ensure that more of our funding went directly into those communities. We started by developing a request for proposal in March 2019. And you may know, excuse me, that the Oregon Center for Children and Youth with Special Health Needs, hosts the Oregon Family to Family Health Information Center. Excuse me. And sorry about that pause. It's allergy season here in Oregon. So we started by developing a request for proposal, and one of our family-to-family health information center parent partners, and actually this is Chuck, used to work for an organization that serves a non-dominant community of color. And we asked him for his feedback on our draft RFP, as if this RFP had come across his desk at his previous position. And Chuck provided us with invaluable feedback, and one of the most powerful observations that he made, and these are my words, not his, in case I misquote him, but he asked us why a dominant culture institution was trying to own information rather than having the information owned within the community itself. And all of his feedback, and particularly that point, gave us opportunity to do a lot of reflection, and it kind of changed our mindset to not only is it important for Ocean to be advocating for children and youth with special healthcare needs at a state level, but we also have a responsibility to be building capacity within communities for community-based organizations to advocate for SHCN in their communities and to partner with us at a state level to advocate for SHCN. So for that reason, we started instead with a request for information. We sought feedback and reaction and to gauge interest from organizations. And we used that information to inform our final RFP. And only organizations that responded to the RFI were allowed to submit for the RFP. So you see the details on the slide, and you can pause the recording. We're not going to go through all of them, but as you can see, the project development took time. And now I will turn it over to Cheryl to talk about our scope of work and our partnership agreements.
Thanks, Allison. So our objectives for this data collection were to learn about the types of care and service needs of children and families' experiences accessing them, accessing culturally responsive care, and experiences with transition to adult health providers. To accomplish that, we outlined 8 activities in which we wanted a partner organization to participate. So they could co-develop a partnership agreement, co-develop and participate in mutual training, co-develop data collection methods and IRB protocols, implement the data collection, co-develop analysis plans and participate in that analysis if desired, co-interpret and disseminate findings, and participate in meetings with us. Next slide, please. Okay, so we co-developed a partnership agreement with SCAFO and LCA during our initial kickoff meeting. The purpose of the partnership agreement is to formalize partnership relationships in terms of laying out our expectations so that we can all move forward with focusing on the content of the project. The agreement provides guidance that can facilitate meaningful and authentic engagement on the part of all partners. So in preparation for this, we reviewed community-based participatory research literature about partnership agreements and pulled examples of what types of agreements should be included. We shared those high-level examples with the organizations to guide our brainstorming session in developing the agreement together. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the high-level headings of the partnership agreement. So we start with our introduction and purpose, which we just said a little bit about. And the next component of the agreement is shared vision and goals. So in developing a shared vision, we started off by sharing what we wrote in the RFP, which includes the mission of Ocean and requirement and purpose of the needs assessment, and also to develop a partnership with SCAFO and LCA so we can help support their community and focusing on the SHCN population. We then had a discussion about what success looks like for each partner organization, their goals, and then how to bring all of those together. Partnership norms are guidelines for the day-to-day functioning of the partnership and include overall project roles and responsibilities, communication pathways, how we're communicating in terms of email communication, checking in, decision-making, and addressing conflict. Data sharing includes raw data sharing and data storage. So we used a secured box folder to share de-identified data. Development and implementation of data collection methods. This includes process for IRB protocol development and data collection instrument development and transcription process. And then data analysis and interpretation explains that us and our partners will have shared data ownership and that we will support them in analyzing and interpreting data. And the final piece is dissemination of findings. So in this section, we describe methods for disseminating findings, which can be through oral presentations in the community, academic conferences, media, published articles, etc. And we will co-develop dissemination products to share findings with participants and local and state partners. And then if us or Scaffold or LCA utilize the findings to develop other unique products, our partners in Ocean will provide the products to each other for review prior to publication. So that was our partnership agreement, and now I'll turn it over to Chuck to talk about the Scaffold experience.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to cover a few highlight points from our experience. First, I'll start with the focus groups themselves. So on your slide, you'll see 4 points. We ended up holding 11 groups in 6 geographic areas throughout the state. If you're familiar with Oregon and the geography of Oregon, there are a few centers of high population, and then a lot of the state is rural. When that applies to African-American population, most people live in the Portland area, but there are African-American communities of smaller size throughout the state, mostly on the west side of the state. So part of Scaffold's efforts overall have been around reaching families with sickle cell anemia throughout the state. So we had an interest in this all along, to not just be in the Portland area, but to also reach out further. So we attempted to go into some of the areas where there's less population than even the Portland area. One of the cool things that was, that's kind of part of the culture and tradition within African-American communities, is that people have a sense of connection and community among themselves. And so when people get together, even if they didn't know each other to begin with, they connected pretty well and pretty quickly. So there was easy rapport building between the participants and the facilitators, and everyone was quite appreciative of the outreach that was made to step out, find them, especially in the communities where there's less representation of African-American people. In the smaller communities, most of the participants end up knowing each other before they got there, and that was just the nature of the experience with the recruiting partner organizations. We can go to the next slide. We'll look at some of the recruitment ideas. So how we went about this is we went to organizations that were serving Black families, not necessarily organizations that were focused on SHCN families, but across the board. We also used professional contacts. So I have a long history of working with Head Start programs, and our partners inside of Scaffold also had contacts with people throughout the state. Some of them were community-based organizations, some were advocacy organizations. We sort of reached the gamut in doing so. We also reached out to traditional parent voice organizations representing families of children with special health needs. One of the things we found out is that no organizations really had programming that was targeted for Black families of children with special health needs. And medically complex families were even more difficult to identify. So I called a few agencies, talked to program managers, and their database didn't really identify Black families, nor did they have a good feel about how many families they were serving in different areas of the state. However, as the word got out, interest within the Black community really increased. And so our initial focus groups were a little bit low, but by the time we got to a second round, especially in the Portland area, the participation level was quite high. Also, interest among extended family members and community members was high too. So we actually ended up doing a companion discussion group with a community organization, even though they were not particularly families of children who had special health needs. Let's move on to the next slide, please. What I'm going to cover now is the way the interviews were set up. We ask about particular areas, including culturally responsive care, access to care, and transition to adult services. So I'm going to cover a few highlights from those 3 points. Culturally responsive care was obviously a big point of conversation for the families, and the families really talked about 3 themes when it came to culturally responsive care. One was experiences of racism, the lack of Black healthcare providers, and then their own experience-based perceptions about dealing with the healthcare system. In the category of racism, people talked about 3 main areas: lack of respect, lack of cultural understanding, and assumptions made about Black people that were conveyed in the interactions that happen between families and healthcare providers. And on each screen, you'll see a sample quote from a participant. You can read those at your leisure, but I won't spend time trying to read those back to you. So in this section, we weren't surprised by the findings that people experience what we might view as microaggressions sometimes, but also things that were much more blatant and frustrating for people and disheartening in their experiences. The other part about this, about assumptions made about Black people, is this is where I think the unconscious bias of providers showed up, and in a safe environment, the families were willing to articulate some of the experiences they were having with people. Let's move to the next slide, please. The lack of Black providers is interesting. I'm from the East Coast, so not seeing Black people is kind of a shock when you move out west, especially into the Oregon area, where you don't think about the idea that you may not find your own community anywhere. But this is kind of a reality for people out here. And so both there is a shortage of Black providers, especially as you move into more rural areas, but also an anticipation that you won't find them. And so, as you'll see in some of the quotes, sometimes people don't even bother to ask because their experience, so here it gets back to previous experiences, their experience of finding someone is pretty limited. So after a while, they give up on even looking for it. Next slide, please. Then this third area, experience-based perceptions of the healthcare system. Some of this is historical and passed on to families through stories. The Tuskegee experiment, of course, being a high-profile experience, but also in today's environment, how people deal with COVID and potential vaccinations and treatments. People are concerned even about whether they'll be used as sort of the test subjects or guinea pigs for ideas before they're used in broader populations. So that distrust of the healthcare system kind of translates into what happens when it comes to getting services, assessments, and evaluations for their children. Again, low expectations of finding Black providers. On the positive side, when people did make connections, families had a lot of positive things to say about the individual care that they had when they made good connections with their healthcare providers. So family-centered care experiences were actually pretty positive as people talked about them. Let's move on. Another area that came up, this was not part of the intentional questioning, but kind of came out in the data, was parents talking about their own traumatic experiences in dealing with healthcare providers, both when they were supporting their children, but also in their own personal experiences. So these things kind of added to expectations and anticipation about what would happen in later experiences. Some of these were very troublesome and upsetting to the families, and also even for us as facilitators to listen to and record, but gave us a good feel about the intensity of the emotions and feelings with the experiences that they're having. Sometimes people not realizing how powerful, in a negative way, these things are affecting people ongoing. The other is our recognition that a lot of families were talking about adverse childhood experiences that their child or grandchild had experienced, or that they may have experienced themselves, and how that added to their experience and connections with dealing with the healthcare system. Parents talking about being depressed, working with their own grandchildren, and dealing with family disruption and substance abuse, things like that, adding to the level of stress and difficulty that they were facing. Next slide, please. Another area that we focused on was the transition from pediatric to adult healthcare. And a connection here was that families talked about this in the same context as earlier around dealing with a healthcare system that may or may not be as responsive to their needs. So families had reasons for wanting to stay involved with their child's healthcare as they became adults. Part of it tied to their experiences in dealing with an unresponsive healthcare system that may have biases built into it. The other is obviously the kinds of barriers as they attempted to stay involved in the healthcare system was trying to push toward independence and treating their child as an adult. And then the third is just this general area of or concern about lack of care and support from the healthcare system. So the same experiences they had with their children when they were younger or for themselves, they anticipated or experienced as their child became an adult themselves and relived the same kinds of challenges in getting the healthcare support that they were looking for. Next slide, please. Access to healthcare was a major question that was asked in the interviews. And I think you'll see this also when Dr. Claudia speaks. A major unmet need was around behavioral and mental health care. Someone to talk to, both for the child, but also for the parents who the struggle with dealing with a child with special health needs is not so much about the child, it's about dealing with the world around you. And someone who you can talk to and understand what it's like to deal with a world that's not very welcoming, not very accommodating, and has very little comprehension of how difficult the world is to navigate is part of that. As you'll see in the rest of there, educational supports, allied therapies, access to those things are difficult for people. And let's flip to our last slide, please. That was it. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Claudia now.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. All right, thank you. Good morning. My name is Dr. Claudia Bisofetzer, and as my colleague expressed all of the process working with African American population in Portland, in Oregon, I'm going to explain a little bit of what it was for us to work with Latino population. So the same as my colleague, we did with the process of recruitment. We presented in both in English and Spanish the flyers in 4 of our Latino Community Association offices located in Redmond, Bend, Madras, and Prineville. Those all located in Central Oregon. With those, we also use different methods of recruitment. So one of them, as I mentioned, the flyers in our offices. The second one was we posted the flyer on Facebook page, the LCA, the Latino Community Association has that. We also contacted our community partners that serve Latino families in Central Oregon, business that employ Latinos in churches, different churches in Central Oregon. So we asked for the permission to post those flyers in their settings. So once we got the participant or the individual interested, they contact our center. And with their permission, we contact them, our staff, the study staff, that we were 3 in those. So another way also to have kind of like a pool of participants or potential individuals to participate in that was the LCA, the Latino Community Association, with a database. So the staff were looking into the database, and if they see they fit the inclusion criteria through the discussions with the office staff, so they recommend to us, and we kind of got, with their permission, we contact those participants. So once we conducted the screening and they meet the criteria, they were invited to participate in the study. Next slide, please. In terms of the data collection, we had a consent process that we apply. So our participants, we went to presented to them, we had for them a verbal consent from potential participants. We also asked them if we can have their consent for the audio recording. And the modality for them was two ways, the individual and focus group, because we were, some of our participants, they were willing to share their experience with us, but in a private setting. So, and we had two options to present to our participants. After the focus group or the individual interview with them, we asked them to respond to answer a demographic questionnaire, just to give us a better idea who our Latino families were participating with us. Right after their presentation, their participation with us, we gave us an incentive of $35. That was the cash, because we realized that some of our Latino families, they don't have a bank account, so it was easier or a card. Childcare and meals were provided if they needed, and we also mentioned to them, so if they want to receive, if they would like to receive the written summary of the results, or maybe approach to our offices and have the results, you know, pick up from our offices. Another thing that we were planning also to do is to share the results with them, because without them, this study will not be possible. But what we are in the area of the COVID-19, so unfortunately we're not going to meet, but we are trying to do probably in the future a virtual session with them, so we can share to them their results. And also we'd like to share our results with OHSU team to our local stakeholders here at a later time. Next slide, please. We have challenges over the course of the study. We wanted to have two different types of focus group in terms of the age of our children that they were participating through their parents in our study. And we have groups with families with children younger than 18, and children and families who have youth adult from 18 to 25 years old. The lack of time was a big issue for our families. They didn't have the time to participate twice in our focus group, from when the child is younger than 18 and when the family member is between 18 and 25 years old. So they came to our focus group and they shared their experiences in the same focus group when they have the children under and above age of 18. Next slide, please. Now, this slide shows a little bit demographic information that we have. We have 22 parents. From them, 15 children were under the age of 18. 7 were between 18 and 26 years old. And 7 of those kids were in transition from pediatric service to adult. Next slide, please, let's go. So this is the results. As you can see, first, we have 4 areas one of my colleagues already mentioned what was the areas to the focus group that we have as a goal. And that was to ask them to describe the need of use of behavioral mental psychiatric health services, such as behavioral therapy assessment and psychologists and more services. So the results that we got from our families and the focus group, that they respond, the majority of them, all of them actually, they had children with needs or that uses behavioral and mental health care. That was the example quote, so you can read that after. That was verbatim results of our focus group with them. So next slide, please. When we asked our families about what their description of the information, the experience was with specialists to get the service from a specialist, the need or use a pediatric specialist. They also reported that pretty much all of them, they described their child need with special care services, all of them. So next slide, please. When we ask how was the experience, describing easy accessing needed for health for their child, our families reported that their child has covered, so all of them with health care insurance. They were thankful and grateful to have that. As you can see an example quote, there's a description that one of our family members said as soon as their baby was born, the fourth day they receive immediate coverage, insurance coverage. So next slide, please. But when we ask the description of how difficult was to access needed health for their child, so most of them, they reported difficulties accessing medical specialists in our area in Central Oregon and allied therapists. So allied therapist, in other words, is occupational physical speech therapy. So they had that. Also, another thing you can read in our report later time, that not only was that difficulty accessing medical specialists, but also was the long waits. The long waits to obtain services, the lack of quality care in Central Oregon, and the lack of needed providers. So next slide, please. In terms of culturally responsive healthcare, that was also another point of our objective in this study. So we asked our families, Latino families, to describe their experiences accessing culturally responsive care for their child. So they reported, unfortunately, experiencing racism in the healthcare system. They were subject to culturally insensitive and discriminatory comments, which invalidated our families' concerns about their child's health and created a hostile environment for families. Next slide, please. Also, when we asked for the experience to, in this case, to have what was the experience with the interpretations for family, the majority of our families, they speak only their native language, in this case Spanish. So they also have difficulties with, in that term, with the interpretation services. So I think this is now our next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the one that our families request. When they requested for interpretation services, there was a delay on that service, on that availability to receive appointments, and some of our families expressed dissatisfaction about the quality of the interpretation. Next slide, please. When we want to have some information or what was their experience transitioning their child from pediatric to adult healthcare, we didn't have saturation, but we kind of have the report from our families that they experience kind of like a lack of information from providers to the information to go to transition from pediatric service to adult healthcare. So they express concerns about the consistency of health insurance, and they have also experienced the difficulties engaging with their child and young adults. And I think that is all the results that we got from this study. So I pass to my colleague Chuck for this slide. So go back to you, Chuck.
Thank you, Claudia. So next we're going to just talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned and give us a chance to share some of our reflections and insights from what we went through. I had the privilege of being able to attend all 11 of our focus group sessions, as well as be involved in recruiting. So being able to see the different answers from these 40 different families over a period of time, and hearing the stories and being reinforced and affirmed for, I think, the efforts that we were making here and how it really resonated for the families was really impactful. So first of all, I wanted to just highlight that the parents are very resilient and persevered through a lot just within the communities that they deal with, but also dealing with different systems as well as the school systems who may or may not be responsive at different times. There was intergenerational trauma that people talked about quite often, of things happening to them or experiences happening at a community level that impacted their individual lives in their families. The stories, from my standpoint, seem to really just illuminate the known inequities that we anticipated would be there, but also as an African American myself, have seen or experienced in my own dealings with the healthcare system and dealing with my own child. So the stories really help put a face onto the statistics that we know about inequities and disparities in health services. Intentional and persistent efforts seem to make a difference. And even reaching out into the community that I knew, helping people to see that we were serious about wanting to hear the voices of a segment of the population that is typically not listened to or heard or known or recognized made a difference. Also within the partnership, our collaboration, really sticking with one another and making connections, even though we had a big snowstorm and then COVID hit. Most of our efforts to get together were thwarted by natural disasters, but we stuck with it anyway. And then just a shared learning. So really a cool thing is we didn't have much contact with the work that Latino Community Action was working on until we got later into the project. And it was refreshing to hear and see that we were hearing similar things from families, and voices were being lifted so that they could be heard. I'll let Claudia speak.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you. Yeah, I will start, taking your words, it was, just want to start from the bottom. It was an enjoyment. It was really nice to work with our Latino families. It was very nice to work with our team in Portland, OHSU. It was really nice, actually, when to get together all the work with Scaffold, with you, Chuck. It shows the diversity of the teamwork really makes this move forward. Within the diversity also we found in our Latino families, although we shared Latino roots, but they come from different parts of South America, from Central America, and from Mexico. So, in so many years living here in this country as well. So there was, within the Latino community, there was diversity, and that was rich that we all appreciated when we, my other two colleagues from Latino Community Association, we really learned from that. The timeline adjustment, yeah, we have to set back a little bit, move, work with around the holidays and the weather. So it's something that we all learn with that. It was great for all of us, back and forth communication with the team in Portland, with or it's just you, you know, listening and stepping back where we're going and what is the next direction to go. So it was really, really helpful for all of us. We learned also that we can be well prepared, we can be serve as a mediator in this process to communicate, to have the voice of our Latino families to upper management and decision in public health. A better understanding what our families are going through. It was at moments heartbreaking for us to see what they're going through, how resilience, as Chuck said, in working with African American population, how resilient are our Latino families as well, that they not only struggle day to day with the love and caring with their own child with special needs, but also with the system to you know, struggling also with them with all the invalidation of what they're going through. So it is heartbreaking for us again. We learn also that altogether, and we are, as my colleague Chuck, in a really good position about what is to provide more cultural competent service to the upper management. And again, we really enjoy, and we were really privileged to work with other Latino families and to work with all of you, and to work also to have you know, the results very similar with my colleague Chuck with Scaffold. So thank you very much. I pass to you, Allison. Okay.
Thanks, Claudia. She'll take it from here. So thank you. So for Ocean, I'll describe a few lessons learned about the collaboration. So with regards to timeline, Claudia briefly discussed some timeline adjustments we had to make, but additionally, we are housed within a medical university. So our Oregon Health and Science University, or OHSU. Our Ocean team acknowledges that we're part of an organization built on white supremacy. So we use a definition and framework from the Dismantling Racism Workbook by Kenneth Jones and Tima Open to understand organizational characteristics that perpetuate white supremacy, one of which is a sense of urgency. And so because we're a state agency, we have deadlines for submitting the results of our needs assessment, and sometimes those deadlines were in conflict with the work. So we've had to thoughtfully balance being responsive to our partners and knowing that this work takes time while still meeting our deadlines. So being part of OHSU, we are required to receive approval from our Institutional Review Board, or IRB, for studies like this. Because Scaffold and LCA staff are part of our research team, there are a number of administrative requirements that took a lot of time for each of our study members to complete. And this was on top of the time required for the IRB to complete its review of our study protocol. So there were additional delays in starting data collection. Additionally, preparing the content of the project in terms of co-developing the IRB protocol, recruitment materials, and data collection instruments also took a lot of time. What we learned in reflecting back on this process is that we focused on making sure Scaffold and LCA understood the IRB content, and we wanted the IRB proposal to be reflective of what everyone wanted to do. So we were paying less attention to making sure that those administrative requirements for IRB were completed. And when we were ready to submit to IRB, we realized that we hadn't been well tracking that there was some pending requirements. With regards to data collection training, additionally, each of our partner organizations have different strengths and experience with collecting data. And in the future, we'll have an intentional conversation earlier around this process, asking the organizations for specifics about their experience collecting data and how to target increasing their data collection capacity. So in reflecting back on this, we realized that we were so busy with the partnership agreement and IRB proposal and other responsibilities outside of this project that we didn't take the time to do that in a more comprehensive way to really have that explicit conversation. So for focus group facilitation training, we want to explore a more culturally responsive approach. So the book that we use as a guide for facilitating focus groups is a popular resource by Kruger and Casey. And we really like this book and do refer to it frequently. But as we were talking through this resource with one of the organizations, it was becoming clear to us that this book was written from a dominant culture in America perspective. So for example, the book explains how to deal with 4 types of participants that you may encounter in a focus group: dominant talkers, ramblers, shy participants, and experts. The book suggests providing eye contact with shy participants to get them to engage and turning away from ramblers and dominant talkers to ensure other participants have a chance to talk. So these type of participants make sense from a dominant culture perspective here in the States, but it may not make sense for non-dominant cultures in the US or even non-dominant immigrant cultures. So those are our lessons learned within this collaboration. And now I will hand it back over to Allison.
So thank you all so much for watching our presentation. We're really grateful for your time and your interest. If you have any questions about our content, please feel free to email us. We also will have our final reports posted on our respective organization websites in August 2020. And for the AMCHP participants among you, we look forward to answering questions on August 6th. Thanks so much.